Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this recap episode of Flow Over Fear, and there be dragons. Okay, so there's not really dragons, but in this episode, I want to recap the interview I just had with Kirk Wayman. And Kirk is a business coach, a leadership, an entrepreneurial coach who helps businesses and helps people like me, leaders, to better get a handle on their business and get better presence in their world and lead their businesses better and do all of that good stuff. And I've been working with Kirk for about 2 years now, for a couple of years now, and he's been helping me to an incredible degree with a business that I run, which has gone through its fair share of challenges, and he's helped me to navigate some of those things. And the first thing that I asked him to do in this interview was to tell his dragon story. This was one of the first stories that he told me because it has a lot to do with fear. And if you didn't know already, I mean, I'm kind of the fear guy. So yeah, so he's going to share his fear story and his dragon story with me. And the reason that was important, the reason I wanted him to share that is because dragons represent for us as human beings basically an embodiment of fear for generations, for millennia, since ancient Chinese cultures and ancient medieval cultures and things like that. There have been dragons that have existed within our mythology, and they have existed really on the fringes of our maps. We've put them there in the worlds that we haven't yet discovered. And yet when we do discover those worlds, when those worlds become known to us, the dragons, we don't find them there. They move beyond the fringes outside of that. And if there was anything that we could learn from that dragon story, and I'm not even going to try to retell it, because if you want to listen to it, just listen to the first 10 or 15 minutes of my interview with Kirk. And he tells it so perfectly, so well. And it's just such a powerful message. So listen to the episode if you haven't already. But what that dragon story conveys is that there's three real truths around it: that there is a known and an unknown world, that we have a world that we live in that is known, and that we have some world that is unknown. I have not been to France, but I know it exists. So, but it's still a world that's unknown to me, or there's a universe out there that we don't know what exists in that universe. There is a known and an unknown world. And then second, that dragons are real. Okay. So in our existing world, in our known world, they don't exist, but they do exist in our mythology, and they do exist in the world. And that where dragons do exist is in the unknown part of our world. And that's really the embodiment of fear, that we are afraid of the unknown. That's where our fear lives, but that's okay, because that fear can be helpful. And another important thing about that dragon story was that oftentimes those dragons are guarding a treasure. So when we look at mythology, we wonder why the dragons have acquired so much wealth or so much gold or treasure or whatever it may be. And the reality is we know the fact that the reason that they're guarding the treasure is because oftentimes our fears are guarding what we most want. They're guarding what we most want. So when we think about it that way, when we're experiencing fear, we're actually in a state of this deep desire of something that we really want. And that gives us that evidence that instead of fighting against this fear, which, trying to fight against a dragon is a very difficult task. It's one we often lose. It's one that we can't fight and win. It's one that we can't run from, because when we run from it, it can overtake us. It can outrace us. It can overpower us. But if we can learn to understand and recognize what it's there for, and learn to dance with it, we can learn to dance with the dragon. We can find what we most desire and ultimately get that. That's the nature of the dragon story, and how we can really reshape our fears into something that we truly want. And so that's really a reflection on what, I try to speak on with my relationship with fear, is that first we spend our time fighting fear. We fight against it and we battle it, and we often lose. And we try to battle it with addictions or different things, or suppressing it, or trying to admit that it's not there, or that it doesn't exist, or whatever. But then we lose, or we try to run from it, and it just chases us and it outraces us. And then when we're ready to heal, we can rise up to face it. We can face our dragons. And when we face it, we start to heal, and we start to acknowledge that fear is a real and legitimate part of life. And then, of course, there's that other element where we actually want to go after what we truly want, where we look at fear and we're able to be discerning and recognize where fear is, yes, telling us when there's legitimate danger, like a bear in our path that we don't want to go toward. Or it can be a signal for pushing against our comfort zone and going beyond it and getting what we really want, which is growth. And that's why I really like what Kirk's message was to us is, in telling this dragon story, he tells us how we can learn to embrace and dance with our dragons, and ultimately lead the dance. When we're leading the dance, we are using fear as a tool of choice to lean into fear and use it to our advantage. So that's why we want to do it. We want to dance with fear. We want to dance with our dragons. We want to lead the dance, and then we want to actually ultimately, as we embrace our fears, we want to navigate by fear to our greatest desires. Now, Kirk knows a thing or two about fear and how it lives its life, and how to get into this flow that we want to that we can rise above fear to get into. He knows about this because of his experience with his son, who battled a terminal heart disease when he was very, very young, right when he was born. He had 2 surgeries, one at 3 days old and then another at 6 months old, and ultimately, lived the first 10 years of his life as a terminally ill patient, heart patient. And that was a very traumatic, a very painful experience for Kirk and his family. And in that, having to navigate that, and this was not a fear that he wanted to get into. This was not a fear he wanted to dance with, but it was a fear that taught him lessons about how that life, how we experience fear in life and how we experience things, and ultimately about facing death, facing our own mortality. Fortunately, his son lived through that and is thriving today in his 20s. But it became a learning experience for Kirk on that front, on how to navigate that grief, how to navigate some of that fear, and how to ultimately rise above and turn it into flow later in his life, which he applied to his later coaching career, and how he helps people to navigate their fears. Throughout that process, he realized that there are a couple of great things that help us navigate through that suffering that he talked about. The one of the important things, and this theme keeps coming up in all of the different interviews that I have with high achievers, is that community, leaning into a like-minded community that might be experiencing the same thing, is an important aspect. Another aspect of it is that there's really no way around some of these suffering experiences, that sometimes we just have to go through them. And as long as we take one step at a time, we just take it one step at a time, we can get through them. This is another common theme that I hear from other people who've achieved great things or walked through trauma or suffering to get to the other side and realize an absolutely great, wonderful life, is that they just keep going. experiences, even though there might not be a way around it. And the final thing was to do the work consistently to redefine and reshape and reframe the meaning in your life. Meaning, don't have this fixed mindset where you have this singular transformation or this singular occurrence that's going to impact who you are, and then it's going to represent you for the rest of your life. That's a fixed mindset. But instead, lean into that growth mindset where you can identify what it is that where you can learn from your experiences, and you can develop these new meanings based on those experiences and start to reframe how your life carries out. So looking at those three things, those were three powerful ways that he had said in which you could navigate through some of this suffering that you achieve or that you go through. And ultimately led him down a path of achieving things that he wanted to get into, that once he started experiencing other things that were challenging in his life, things such as the 2008 crash while he was working in the building industry, and the construction industry. He took that as an opportunity, even though that was a very difficult time for anybody working in those fields. He took that as an opportunity to get his master's degree and to really do some introspection and to search inside himself of what he really wanted to be. What hill was he going to die on? And he found coaching. That's where he developed Ikon Coaching and this platform by which he helps other people find their meaning, their purpose, their entrepreneurial spirit, or their business meaning. And that's what Ikon Coaching does. So this was a great all-around conversation with a coach, somebody that I very much admire, somebody who has achieved a great deal, somebody who's walked through suffering and come out the other side a more empowered human being, and somebody who is serving the world in a very, very meaningful way. So if you haven't already, listen to the episode. It was a great interview. It was a great story on the front end about dragons and how we can relate that to fear and overcoming fear. And he talks about his lessons from his suffering, and ultimately how he now serves the world in terms of coaching and how he's going to continue to do so going forward. And I look forward to having a round 2 with him where we can get into some of his frameworks. But in the meantime, just listen to the episode. It was really great. And I'll look forward to catching you next time. Thanks for joining me. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.